Hello! Today we're creating this entire animation without setting a single keyframe. That's right, no keyframes allowed. And we're using a workflow that means it's going to be easy to recreate this entire animation in various different visual styles. That means that we can easily create 1 or 2 or 3 very distinct visual styles, all built on the same foundation without any keyframes to create the animation. So this is what we're going to be creating today. Let's dive in. We're going to be kicking things off by making the environment. And to start off, I'm double clicking the rectangle tool to create a shape layer that's the size of my composition. And I'm then going to be switching that to a linear gradient and going from a sort of light blue to a white color. And then I have these 2 little control points that I can just move around to do a little bit of a gradient sky. And now we're going to go ahead and create a camera, and we're going to create a null. And this is always my preferred way of working, where we have a 3D null, we parent the camera to the null, and then just for sake of organization, I'm going to make those yellow. Let's get into making a cloud, and I've created a new composition here. It's 3000 by 3000 pixels, and this is where I'm going to be building my cloud. So again, I'm using a rectangle to start, a rounded rectangle in this case. I'm just going to size it down quite a bit and make a rectangle and round off the corners. So we have this sort of pill button looking shape. And I've added a white fill and a black stroke. We're then just going to rename it and duplicate it to have a circle instead. We're all working on the same shape layer for now, so I'm just duplicating the shapes on the same shape layer, and I'm then going to use a merge path to actually merge all these shapes together into one cohesive cloud shape that has a white fill and a black outline. Let's move over to making the sun. So we're building every single element of this entire scene in their own compartments or their own compositions. And this is always my preferred way of working. If you want to know more about the basics of the design workflow in After Effects, check out my Intro to After Effects course, where one video is dedicated to this entire workflow. I'm starting off by using a rectangle again. I'm using the middle shape for the sun, and now I'm creating a new layer and just drawing with the pen tool 2 dots to form the rays of the sun. And I'm starting in the middle of the composition and then putting the point above it a little bit higher up, making that the same color as the sun, so a bright yellow. And then inside the stroke, I'm just going to change that to a round cap so we have nice rounded corners. I'm now going to add a trim path, and I can trim the path itself so I don't have the entire line being shown. I just want to have that little part that's going to be my sun ray. And the reason why I'm working this way, by drawing the entire path from the middle of the composition, is to be able to do this next step where we add a repeater. This is going to allow us to repeat that single shape around the sun. So by default, you get 3 copies, and they're moved 100 pixels on the X position. We're going to set that to 0, and we're just going to change the rotation to a render number just to show you how it's working right now. But we don't want to calculate this in our minds. We want to use a quick little expression and write 360 divided by, and then pick whipping that to the number of copies. So when it's set to 3, it's going to be 360 divided by 3. When I change that number now to 6, it's going to be 360 divided by 6. And this means that regardless of the number of copies, they're going to be evenly divided and rotated around that center point to create my sun rays around the sun. And now I can just play around with the trim path to show how much or how little of the rays that I want to see. Let's get into finalizing the environment. We haven't started animating yet. We're just building all of the elements that we're going to be needing, and we're building everything together into our scene composition now. So I'm importing my cloud and I'm importing my sun. I'm just scaling those down and making those 3D layers. And now I want to just get a nice layout going where we have our sun in the middle, with a cloud over on the left side, and then I can duplicate that cloud composition and just move it around a couple different positions here. So I'm just focusing on creating a nice layout in a still frame before starting to animate. And again, we're going to be animating this thing without any keyframes. So just to show you, I have now duplicated the cloud and I've just put it in the middle. I've turned off every other layer, and I'm just showing here that I want to move it to the left or to the right, but I don't want to set keyframes, and I don't want to bother with whatever the origin position of this layer is. I just want to move it on the x-axis. Because it is a 3D layer, I have x, y, and z. So I'm going to apply an expression here. I'm just going to make up a variable and call it x, and I'm saying x equals value, which means that whatever my starting value is going to be kept for this expression. So x equals value plus time multiplied by just a random number, and that will be dictating the speed of which the cloud is going to be moving. So I've just put in 30, and then I need to list for After Effects where this expression to the x should be applied. And that's what I'm doing here by writing x in square brackets 0. That means that it's going to be applied to the 0 value, which is the x position. And then I'm writing value 1, which is the y, and value 2, which is the c. So I don't want to bother with those y or the c. I just want to apply this expression to the x position. And now you can see the cloud is moving, and when I change the value to 300, it's going to be moving from left to right, but much faster than it did before when it was time multiplied by 30. And this is the value that you can play around with. You can also say value minus time multiplied by value, and now it's going to be moving from right to left instead, so it's going the opposite direction. And this is really the basics of how we're going to be animating these clouds. One expression, 2 rows, just stating that the x is going to equal value plus or minus time, which is the time of the composition, multiplied by a number. So what I like to do is I create a control layer and I apply a slider control to it, so I can control everything from this one slider instead of specifying it in my expressions. So I've renamed my slider speed because that's what it's going to be controlling, and I've just revealed my slider in the timeline, and I'm going to be removing the value 300 and just use the pick whip instead. So I'm saying x equals value plus or minus time multiplied by my speed slider. So instead of specifying 30 or 300 or whatever number, I'm now controlling this with my slider. So when I change the value to 300, we're back to the exact same result that we had before, but I do have the flexibility of having the control of this number in a slider instead of in the expression code. And that makes things much easier because now I can copy expression only and I can paste that on all of my clouds. And that expression is going to be applied to all of them. So all of them have their original x position. Then time multiplied by the slider is applied to these clouds, and that means that all of them are now moving from their origin to the right. Y and Z positions are not affected at all, and when I change the speed on my slider, that's going to be changing for all of them. So now I can go into one of them and say x equals value negative time multiplied by the slider value, and that's now going to move that cloud in the opposite direction from everybody else. Let's animate our sun now, and we're going to use the time expression again, and we'll say time multiplied by that same speed slider once more. So now the rotation is moving according to the time of the composition multiplied by our slider value, which at the moment is set to 50. But I can also at the end of this add more things to it, like multiplied by 0.5 to essentially cut that value in half. So it's not rotating as much, but I don't have to have a separate speed slider for my sun. I can use the same one as for the clouds, but just changing the value. So just for fun, we're now going to be making this whole thing in two more styles, and I'm doing that by just duplicating the composition 2 times and then duplicating the sun and the cloud compositions and renaming them. And then I'm just going through those compositions and changing the design, and this whole thing is just very sped up, just to show you how flexible and easy it is to work with this kind of workflow where you're building every single asset in its own composition. That means that you have the power to go into the compositions later, make updates to the design, and really be able to have a very, very flexible workflow for creating many different visual styles based on the same foundation. So you're creating the core animation and the core layout once, then you can apply several different styles to this, which is a very flexible way of working. And just like that, without any keyframes, we've animated the clouds moving left and right, we've animated the sun rotating, we have everything designed in one style, and now we're popping over to style number 2, which features a completely different visual look and feel for the way the sun looks, the way the clouds look, and we've even have a third style here. Again, very different visual style compared to the first two. The animation itself is still the exact same, and we're able to create that whole thing in a procedural way without any keyframes. And we're controlling the speed of the rotation and speed of position with one slide.